All right, everyone. We are back with another episode of She Talks Business, and we are back with the lovely Michelle Weger. If you are watching this on video and not just listening, you'll see that we have the lovely Quinn in the background as well. So, the last episode, Michelle and I talked a lot about how to do hard things. If you haven't listened to that episode, I would highly recommend you go back and listen to it. We have been talking about her book, Don't Snooze Your Dreams, and some of the things that she has written about in her book. And today, or on this episode, what I want to talk to her about is how she approached writing the book. So, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm
Welcome
excited
back
to
again.
share this.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So let's start. How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, from when I started, that was back in December. From when I really seriously actually did it, that was back in May, and it was published at the very beginning of September. So
That's pretty
once I
fast.
actually, well, exactly, which is part of why I want to share these things, because I know it can take people years to write a book.
Mhm.
And I think that some of the methods that I created for myself will help people be able to achieve their own dream of writing a book much faster and with more ease.
Awesome. Well, I'm all in on that because I want to write books, lots of books. And I get caught up in, let's call it paper dinosaur mode. Sometimes think that it's not good enough, it's not helpful enough, it's not this enough, it's not that enough, which is really just fear that people won't buy and like my book. And think I'm a terrible writer, which all I know is not true. But at the end of the day, you need to sit your bum down in front of a keyboard and you need to write. So tell us
Or
what.
do you?
Okay, well, there you go. So I have no idea what you're going to tell us. So um, tell us what unconventional things you did to keep yourself focused and engaged on getting the book done. What did you do?
The first thing I did is I decided to write the book after I did a keynote for Keep in Florida last year.
Mhm.
And it was super successful. The feedback was incredible. And in it, it was the first time I'd ever shared the dream method with anyone outside of my own brain and very close friends. I would tell them single steps when they were struggling with something. But the whole 5 steps of the method had never left my brain before. And I put it up and I shared it and I explained it. And the feedback was so, so good. And that's when I couldn't deny I had to do a book. You'd been telling me for 5, 6 years that I needed to do it. And I almost always do everything you tell me to do in business. But that one, no way. So as soon as I knew I had the idea I really wanted to move forward with, I
Did you
actually,
finish your goals?
yes, I do. I always do. I recorded myself with a mic talking through the keynote. And for me, I already had that from when I was practicing before I presented. But you don't have to be a speaker to do this. Once you know what you want to talk about, you talk. You pretend there's an audience and you talk. Then I got a transcription, and that made it very easy to break down the sections of the book. And almost immediately, I had the outline. I had chapters. I did not obsess about their names. Instead, it was just,
Chapter
the
one,
dream
chapter two.
one. Exactly. Yeah. They didn't. And then I moved them around in the end, but it allowed me to take a step forward. That was good enough that I could move forward. In the book writing community I was in two of them, and both of them have so many people that would say, "Oh, I'm still on the outline. I'm still on the preface. Oh, I'm working on the back cover," and they'd be doing that for weeks. Don't do that. Yeah, put something in place, move forward. We're not in the typewriter era. you can go back and change things, and you will. The next thing I did is that whenever I would have an idea for a section or a story, it was almost always when I was in the car or when I was on a walk or I was in the garden. It was never when I was at my computer ready to write. So I'd get my phone out, go to the voice memo app, and record what I wanted to say. And I would say it the way I would if I was on a podcast. Yep. And then you take that transcript, and then I copied it and I pasted it into a Word doc. And they each got their own Word doc. And that was a lot easier for me than having to choose a time to write, sit down, and hope you feel creative right now. It allowed me to more naturally create the content when the inspiration hit versus when I chose a time.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, because I've done podcasts that way, where I've got bullet points on a slide and I'm recording a solo podcast. I'm not reading. I just have key points that I want to talk about, and I'm talking about them. I'm riffing and I'm talking to the audience. And so it really is a powerful way to get information out of your head and onto paper. And what I like about it is you really focused on a presentation. So for people that don't have a presentation, the starting point really should be, think about your book like you're putting together a presentation. Put together a framework, an outline. Like, if you were going to go on stage, what would the 10 slides be that you would want to talk about? And then use that as your guide to start writing. Now, I'm
Exactly.
curious, technical. So I get transcripts from Zoom and they all have timestamps and all that garbage on them. How did you get your transcripts so they were clean and useful to work with? Or did you just edit all that stuff out?
So I chose to use AI for mine. I made that decision because although that information could be taken and could be used for future AI training, even though they say it won't, so what?
So you had AI do the transcription.
I had AI take out all of the timestamps. I had AI take out any filler words, and I had AI flag places where the sentences didn't make sense. So because I often was driving, as a passenger most times, when I was recording these, sometimes there'd be road noise or my husband would say something. And so it allowed quick flagging of those things. So I could quickly put in what I knew I meant to say within the week of having originally made the recording. And then I save it in the document, give it a name, which was ironically how the chapters, the stories ended up being named. It would be a story about X. And I actually kept those in the end because I kind of loved how basic and also clear the names were. And I had probably 80 different Word documents by the time I was done just sharing thoughts into a recording.
So did you print all 80 documents and then kind of put them on a table and put them together so that you could see how you wanted to string the book together?
I didn't. I put numbers at the front of them, 1 through 6 for each chapter, and then the intro. And I would put a number of which letter of the method I thought it best fit with. And as soon as I had that in place, I could see that some steps had 6 or 7 stories when I only wanted 3. And that very clearly let me see, like, I'm actually more than ready to put this thing together into book format. I have more than enough content. But I felt like I didn't. I felt like I was so far from being done until I actually looked at it in its entirety. I loved them being in separate documents because when I first tried to write and I sat down and I started with the preface, and then there's the introduction, and it has to go in chronological order. That was awful. That did not work for me. I wanted to put the most heart into it first and then bridge the sections together.
Hmm. That makes sense. You wanted to write about the stuff that you were, or talk about the stuff you were excited to talk about, and then kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah,
I like it.
exactly.
I also, having binge read your book, I can I can now see why it reads so well, because it does read in a very conversational manner.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that.
it's not written like a, you know, uh, I'm going to say a Ben Hardy book. Like it's not like a research heavy book.
Yeah.
It feels like a very conversational storytelling book that's got principles that are practical and easy to put into
Mhm.
place for the reader. So that makes sense now that you've told me that. Cool. That's
Yeah.
great. I love it.
One
It's
of
a great
my
tip.
favorite pieces of, well, reviews from an advanced reader was, I feel like I'm having a conversation over a latte with my bestie.
Hmm.
And I loved that because who do you take advice from? Who do you enjoy hearing from? Your friends.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very easy read. Like it's a light read. It's not a heavy read, but it's an inspirational read. And there are things that will stick in your brain, like the paper dinosaur and the terrorist in my head. Okay, what do you hope this book does for other people?
Ooh, heavy question. There's two things. The first one is it takes an average of 10 to 15 years to get diagnosed with narcolepsy. It took me 5, and those 5 years were awful. I don't even want to think about what 2 to 3 times longer would have been like and what that would have done to me as a person. And narcolepsy is so rare that it's not surprising it takes that long to get diagnosed. Most doctors I've met, I'm their first narcoleptic they've ever met in real life. There's one little section on one day in med school, which is fair. It is a very rare thing. It shouldn't be as covered as things that most patients will have. Because of that, one of my big hopes, my biggest dream, is that there will be people who read it themselves or who see someone they know in the symptoms part, and that it could get them closer to an earlier diagnosis and save them those years pain and unknown.
Well, and not only the pain, but I almost wonder if part of your success hasn't been that you were diagnosed early. Because if you had suffered for an additional 15 years, I can imagine your self-esteem and your self-confidence would be even lower, and your
Yeah,
drive and determination wouldn't be what it was when you were diagnosed.
absolutely. So 5 years into diagnosis, so I would have been 22. I'm currently 33. So 1 year ago would have been 15 years.
Yeah.
Even if we look at the 10-year span, I won 40 under 40. I created a very successful business, and I bought this house in cash with no mortgage before what would have been the 10 years. So
Hmm.
you are right. There's no question. I would be I would be at the very, 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 very beginning of trying to put together a life.
Hmm.
And who knows if it would have been as, well, I was going to say easy, but it's never easy. But, an extra 5 or 10 years of being that confused and tired and feeling small and bad, that will
Hmm.
make doing hard things even harder.
Yeah, for sure. For
That's
sure.
my big broader goal. And then for everybody else, I hope that they take one thing from the book and apply it and achieve something that they want to achieve. And I hope they tell me about it and send me a picture or a message, as I love memorializing other people's wins. I love celebrating with people, and that would be so special for me. And of course, then the impact that would have on other people would be amazing. And I know you know that because I share with you when I've achieved something that you've been a part of. And
Mhm.
that's special.
Absolutely. Um, what do you wish that you had known about writing and publishing a book that you discovered on this journey?
I wish I had had someone to review the book who had review the book, not just the proofreading, not just the basic editing, but things like the structure of it. So, for example, it has the world's longest introduction. I did that because that's the entire part that's my story. I now know that that is not what we are supposed to do. Although I am pretty much the epitome of not what we're supposed to do. So kind of works. But I didn't have someone for that type of role. And I think that, when you pour so much of yourself into something like a book, missing the opportunity to have someone who has knowledge about what makes books great, someone who to look at it from the literary eye, is something very valuable that I didn't have. And I think I wish I had.
Yeah, like a structural editor or a role model that could go through the manuscript and point things out to you before you were done to kind of critique and give you feedback on how to make it better. I think that's a good point. And sometimes we're afraid to do that, right? Like sometimes the terrorist in our head says, oh no, don't show it to anybody because it'll be hard. I remember when I wrote my first book, Pilot to Profit, I asked Chris Brogan, who's a New York Times bestselling author, if he would write me an endorsement. And he said, sure, but send me the manuscript. And so I'm all, happy sending my manuscript. And then I get basically all this constructive feedback. And I am like, no, I'm done. What do you mean? The chapters read like they were written in isolation. There's no red thread bringing them. Like he gave me all this critical feedback. And I was like deflated and I was so disappointed. And I rewrote the whole thing. Like I re-edited the whole thing from beginning to end based on his feedback. And it made it a much, much better book. And then I sent it to him again, and he had more feedback for me. And unfortunately, I didn't have the stamina to keep at it. And so I think one of the things that I would say to people is don't be in such a rush to publish your book that you don't end with the product that you are going to be proud of. And I see some people, they've got an arbitrary date in mind that it's got to be done by. And if they hadn't had that date in mind, if they had been more focused on really creating a quality book versus just meeting the deadline, then they would have given themselves the space to keep at it until it was something that they were really, really, really proud of. At least that's how I felt about mine when I got to the end.
That's great advice. And I also believe that the universe will always give you gifts, with timing. So my book came out 5 whole days earlier than it was supposed to somehow. And the timing ended up being quite interesting because that day I was flying to another city to record something for filming that at this time I can't talk about, but it'll probably be live by the time this episode live. And it made for beautiful timing because I got to announce it in a video on a plane and it was very special, but it wasn't planned. And, even when you plan for a specific date, things can still go wrong, whether moving forward or backwards. And you have to have faith that there will be something special that occurs, or you can create something special, even if it's not the magical date you first had in your mind. Does that really matter? Or can you make something special about any date?
True. Very, very true. You can make any date special if you put enough effort into it. What advice would you give someone listening who wants to write a book? What would you tell them to think about in terms of, you've already talked about, how to kind of get the writing done, but what other things would you tell them when it comes to writing a book based on what you've learned?
Share stories, thoughts, and strategies with people in person and see which ones light up eyes. Because those are the things that are going to help you create something more impactful and memorable. And I did that with which stories that I chose. There are a couple that I didn't put in the end that are some of my favorites. And it was because I realized that I am emotionally attached to those stories, but they didn't light people's eyes up when they'd hear them. And that showed me that they weren't the ones that were the best fit for the readers, which is what matters the most at the end of the day. I can keep those ones for myself and read them to myself at night if I want to.
Or you could add them as, additional stories to go with the book. You could use those stories as part of the marketing to support the different chapters. That's a great way to do that. Because if you've got 6 or 7 chapters that go with the dream method, for example, then you could literally, hey, here's an extra story that aligns with, deciding, like, whatever
I love that.
the acronym, what the acronym stands for, you could go through and do that. Yeah. One of the things that I learned years ago from, I forget which Heath brother it was, Chip or Dan Heath, is that most people never get past chapter 2 in a book.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
because most people never get past chapter 2 in a book, the emphasis of every book should be on making chapter 1 and 2 the best of the book. If they only ever read chapter 1 and 2, would they get the most value from the book? And so I think that's something to keep in mind as well. A lot of people don't read. And so I'm going to like out myself. I'm the one who gave Michelle the feedback on the introduction, because the introduction, while it reads exceptionally well, is long. And I know people that never read the introduction. They just skip to chapter 1. And so if I had been advising you on the book, which I didn't, I would have advised making the introduction briefer and carrying some of that into other aspects of the book so that you could be sure that the reader that starts at chapter 1 has the full picture that they needed.
Yeah, agreed. And I did intentionally put my entire chronological story in that first, what should have been chapter 1, because I'd heard that advice that most people never get past the first 2 chapters. And I wanted to make sure that the story that hopefully anyone can find a piece of themselves in, and the paper dinosaurs and terrorists, if they only read the first 2 parts, they will get those parts.
Well, the beauty of print on demand is you can change your manuscript and have your publisher upload a new edition at any time. So that's a great and wonderful thing about this digital world that we live in. So
I love that. And that's a good point about most things, right? Done is better than perfect. You've told me that so many times over the years, and I've told it to so many other people. Nothing is ever truly done anyways. And that's great, because we evolve as people, we learn more things, and that means we can finesse things and move forward, or we can leave them alone and create something new.
Absolutely. What about marketing? What do you plan to do to get your book out there to the masses?
Well, there's a super duper massively exciting announcement that will be coming soon about a donation of my books. And I asked for that in the place of payment for something. And I know there are people that will ask for their books to be purchased for the audience, let's say, instead of getting a speaker fee. And I would love to see my book in every high school in Canada and the United States. Although it's not a book meant for teenagers specifically, I think about what if I'd known some of these tactics and things when I was 17, 18 years old. Whoa, like I've done pretty well, but I can't imagine where I would be at. And so I want that to happen. And so a huge part of my plan is I'm going to find corporate buyers that will purchase the books as donations for high schools and libraries, tax write-off for them. I'm not looking for a markup because I want this book in as many hands as possible. And I don't know anyone else that's ever done this, but that is kind of me in a nutshell. So
have you considered going to the provider of the medication that you take for narcolepsy and asking them to purchase and put this into schools?
So I've tried to contact Jazz Pharmaceuticals a few times, and I will continue to until I get an answer, because I think that they of all companies would get tremendous value. The more people diagnosed earlier means more people on medication earlier, which is billions with a B of dollars for them,
Okay,
and
so here's what
much
you
better
need to
lives for
do.
others. Oh,
Here's what you
tell me
need to
business,
do.
Lisa.
Okay, you need to get 2 hardcover copies of your book.
Mm-hmm.
You need to write a letter, and you need to mock up a new page on the inside that says, this book is in this library because of Jazz Pharmaceuticals, and you need to send your letter and your vision and your dream, and you need to tell the president of that pharmaceutical company why they need to get this book into high schools so that kids can self-diagnose at a younger age.
Oh, I love it.
That's
All
what
right,
you
I'm
need
going to
to
do it. It's
Yeah,
going to happen.
do it. But send 2 copies. Don't send one. Send 2 copies of the book.
Why two?
You always send 2 copies. You send one for the reader and one for them to give away.
Ooh, you're good, Lisa.
Hey man, I hang out with some really good allies and role models too. And then I get to pass my lessons along. So I forget who I heard that from. It was either Colleen Francis or it was Alan Weiss that said to do that. The other smart thing that I've heard is to um, put like post-it notes in the book, like little flags
Hmm.
in sections that you would specifically like the person receiving the book to read. And in some cases, you could put a post-it note inside. You could put a little flag and then a post-it note inside and a little handwritten note that says, this is, if you only read one thing, read this. And
Oh,
it's
I love it.
very custom to who you're sending the book to.
Yeah, that's personal relationships and
Yeah.
putting in the effort for the individual. I
Mm.
love that. And isn't that what we all want to receive instead of a mass market generic thing?
Yeah, for sure. So if you're listening and you have a dream to write your book, don't snooze it. Take out a PowerPoint presentation, record some words, use AI to get rid of all the timestamps on the transcript, and get to work putting it together and building something that you can be proud of. It doesn't have to be a 60,000 word book. How many words are in your book? Do you know? In the manuscript?
37,000, but that wasn't the
37.
plan. 30 was all I wanted, but with this method of building a
Mm-hmm.
book, it became very
Yeah.
easy to go way more.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing to do is to set a minimum for yourself. A lot of contemporary books are 25 to 30,000 words now because people don't have the same attention spans that they once did to read great big huge books. So give yourself a number. I mean, when I start writing, my goal is 10,000, 10 to 15,000 words. It'll take somebody an hour to read. And if I get to that, then yay, I'm happy. But then as you keep writing, you inevitably end up with more. But if you set a goal that's lower, then it's easy for you to reach that goal and then exceed it. So, all right. Thank you, Michelle, for being here for this special 2-part episode. And I hope you all run out and buy a copy of Don't Snooze Your Dreams. In fact, I hope you run out and buy 2, one for you and one to donate to a local school or a local teen in your community. And if you do that, I want you to upload a photo on Instagram. I want you to tag it Dane on a plane, right?
Staying on a
At
plane.
at Dane on a plane, which is Michelle. And I want you to write in the comments, I bought 2, one for me and one to give away. All
Thank you,
right.
Lisa.
Thanks. You're welcome. Thanks for listening. And we will see you on another episode next week.